Chapter 10. You didn't, Mercy gasped. Mr. Kimberly himself? How did you ever dare, Kit? I don't know, admitted Kit. Now that it was over, her knees were shaking. But he was very fair. He listened to me, and he finally agreed I could have one more chance. I won't let you down again, Mercy, I promise. I never thought you had let me down, Mercy said loyally. It's just that you do have a way of surprising people. You certainly must have surprised Mr. Kimberly. He isn't known for changing his mind. I surprised myself, Kit laughed. I really can't take any credit for it, Mercy. I think I was bewitched. Bewitched? I met the witch who lives down in the meadow. It was she who gave me the courage. Mercy and her mother exchanged startled glances. You mean you talked with her? An anxious frown wrinkled Mercy's forehead. Mercy and her mother I went into her house and ate her food. But I was joking about being bewitched. She's the gentlest little person you ever saw. You'd love her, Mercy. Kit, Aunt Rachel set down her heavy flat iron and regarded her niece seriously. I think you had better not say anything to others about meeting this woman. Why, Aunt Rachel? You, of all people. You can't believe she's a witch. No, of course not. That is just malicious gossip. But no one in Weathersfeld has anything to do with Hannah Tupper. Why on earth not? She is a Quaker. Why is that so dreadful? Rachel hesitated. I can't tell you exactly. The Quakers are queer, stubborn people. They don't believe in the sacraments. What difference does that make? She is as kind, as good as you are, Aunt Rachel. I could swear to it. Rachel looks genuinely distressed. How can you be sure? Quakers cause trouble wherever they go. They speak out against our faith. Of course, we don't torment them here in Connecticut. In Boston, I've heard they've even hanged some Quakers. This Hannah Tupper and her husband were branded and driven out of Massachusetts. They were thankful enough just to be let alone here in Weathersfield. Has she ever done any harm? No, perhaps not, though there's been talk, Kit. I know your uncle would be very angry about this. Promise me you won't go in there again. Kit looked down at the door. All her fine resolves about trying to understand and to be patient, and already she could feel the defiance rising again. You won't, will you, Kit? I can't promise that, Aunt Rachel, said Kit unhappily. I'm sorry, but I just can't. Hannah was good to me, and she's very lonely. I know you mean to be kind, insisted Rachel, but you are very young, child. You don't understand how sometimes evil can seem innocent and harmless. 'Tis dangerous for you to see that woman. You must believe me. Kit picked up her wool cards and set to work. She knew she looked stubborn and ungrateful, and she felt so. The hard little knot had kinked up inside her tighter than ever. Coming home through the meadow, everything had seemed so simple, and here it was all tangled again. Only one thing was sure. She had found a secret place, a place of freedom and clear sunlight and peace. Nothing, nothing that anyone could say would prevent her from going back to that place again. Should she tell William Ashby about Hannah? She wondered that evening as they sat talking in the summer twilight. No, he would doubtless be horrified. William seemed a stranger, even though he came faithfully every Saturday evening, and often now appeared unexpectedly on fine evenings between. She could never be sure what thoughts were hidden behind that impassive face, but she had learned to recognize the sudden stiffening of his jaw muscles that meant she had said something shocking. That happened often enough in spite of her best intentions. Better not to provoke it now by mentioning a harmless Quaker. She would like to tell John Holbrook, she thought, but there was never a moment where she could speak to him alone. Frequently now, on these mild evenings of early summer, John joined the family as they sat outside. The woman would carry their knitting to the doorstep, and they would all talk quietly there till the mosquitoes and the coming darkness drove them indoors. John had never formally had asked formally permission to call. He had merely taken literally Rachel's invitation to come again. There had never been the slightest hint that he was courting Judith. He never seemed to single her out, but sometimes he consented when she suggested that they walk along the green in the twilight. That was all the encouragement Judith needed. Indeed, it was more than enough to satisfy the whole family of John's intentions. Not even her father could have failed to guess that Judith was in love. She had never spoken another word, even to Mercy or Kit after that first surprising disclosure, but there was a brilliance in her eyes, a warm color in her cheeks, and a new sweetness in her manner. Less and less often as the summer set in, did her tart tongue discomfort her cousin. She did not even chatter as readily, and often she seemed to be withdrawn into some secret world. Kit watched her, half envious and half puzzled. The sober young divinity student seemed an odd match for Judith's high spirits. Truth to tell, Kit herself was a little disappointed in John. Beside William, who was so set in his ways, John seemed scarcely able to make up his mind at all. When the talk turned to politics, as it inevitably did, William made a far better showing than John. Nothing the revered Dr. Buckley could say or do could be wrong in his pupil's eyes. Even the fervent defense of the king's policies, which went against all John's upbringing. Matthew Wood, after baiting John with fierce questions that threw the young student into confusion, had scornfully labeled him a young toady with no mind of his own. For once, Kit was inclined to agree with her uncle. Probably, she concluded now, it would do no good to ask John about Hannah Tupper. Whatever Dr. Buckley thought about Quakers, John would think so too. She had to bide her time for 2 weeks before she could find another opportunity to visit the Meadows. Kit kept her word to Mr. Kimberly and threw herself so diligently into the schoolwork that the children were bewildered. There were no more stories, no games, even no small unorthodox poems. After school hours, there were the gardens to weed and the first crop of flax to harvest in the hilly slopes above the town. Finally, on one hot afternoon, Kit and Judith finished their stint of onion rows a little early, and as they trudged back along the dusty path, Kit looked across the fields to the roof of the lopsided house by Blackbird Pond and knew that she could not pass by one more time. I'm going over there to see Hannah Tupper, she announced, trying to sound matter of fact. The witch? Have you lost your senses, Kit? Judith was scandalized. She's not a witch, and you know it. She's a lonely old woman, and Judith, you couldn't help liking her if you knew her. How do you know? Demanded Judith. Kit gave her cousin a short and careful version of the meeting in the meadow. I don't see how you dare, Judith exclaimed. Really, Kit, you do the oddest things. Come with me now, Judith, and see for yourself. Judith couldn't be budged. I wouldn't step inside that house for anything, and I don't think you should either. Father would be furious. Then you go on without me. I won't be long. What shall I tell them at home? Tell them the truth if you like, responded Kit airily, knowing quite well that Judith, for all of her disapproval, would never give her away. The common bond of just being young together in that household was strong enough for that. She set off through the grass, leaving her cousin standing doubtfully in the path. There was a pleasant humming sound in the cabin. Hannah sat before her small wheel, her foot moving briskly on the treadle. Sit down, child, while I finish this spindleful. She smiled as though Kit had merely stepped outside the door a moment before. Kit perched on a bench and watched the whirring wheel. I came to tell you that I made my peace with the schoolmaster, she said at last. I couldn't come before because I've been teaching in the school again. Hannah nodded without surprise. I thought thee would, she commented. Does it go better with thee now? Yes, I suppose so. At least Mr. Kimberly should be satisfied. He says that children are evil by nature and that they have to be held with a firm hand. But it's not much fun trying to keep my hand firm and being so solemn all day long. I feel sorry for those little boys. Hannah glanced over at Kit briefly. So do I, she said dryly. Did the schoolmaster make thee promise never to smile? Kit looked back at the faded eyes, sunk deep in wrinkles, and caught the twinkle there. Suddenly she laughed. You're right, she admitted. I haven't even dared to smile. I'm afraid if I let myself go an inch, I'll do something disgraceful again. But Mercy smiles all day long and still keeps order. She reached down and scooped up the sleeping cat from the boar, settling its limp weight in her lap and tickling the soft chin until a contented purr almost matched the hum of the spinning wheel. The late afternoon sun slanted through the open door and fell across Hannah's gnarled hands as they moved swiftly and surely. Peace flowed into Kit. She felt warm and happy. How fast you go, she said, watching the thread fattening on the bobbin. Did you grow the flax yourself? Hannah dipped her fingers into a gourd shell without slackening the wheel. Some of the families in town always bring me their flax to spin, she explained. I made a nice neat thread, if I do say so, but every year it seems to get harder to see it. I have to tell by the feel. Is it smooth enough, does thee think? Kit admired the fine, perfect thread that slipped evenly through Hannah's fingers. It's beautiful, she said. Even Mercy can't spin it like that. Hannah looked pleased as a child. For pence of skin, she said, enough to pay the taxes and buy what I need. Taxes? On the swampland? Kit was indignant. Of course, Hannah said matter-of-factly, and the fines for not going to meeting. They make you pay fines for that? Wouldn't it be better to go to meeting instead? Kit looked around at the much mended clothing and the sparse furnishings of the little room. I doubt they would welcome me, Hannah said, again dryly, even if I chose to go. In Massachusetts, we Quakers had our own meetings. Can I become a Quaker? Asked Kit, only half joking. I'd rather pay a fine any day than to go to meeting. Hannah chuckled. Thee doesn't become a Quaker just to escape the meeting, she said, and Kit flushed at the gentle reproof in her tone. How does one become a Quaker? She asked. The old woman was silent for a moment. Before she could answer, a shadow fell across the sunlight. A tall figure filled the doorway. Kit started. For an instant, she thought that Hannah actually had conjured up a vision. There, unbelievably, was Nathaniel Eaton, the captain's son, leaning easily on the doorpost, with that well-remembered mocking smile in his blue eyes. I might have known, he said, that you two would find each other. Hannah's face crinkled up with pleasure. I knew thee would come today, she triumphed. I saw the dolphin pass Wright's Island this morning. Kit, my dear, this is the seafaring friend I told thee about. Nate made a bow. Mistress Tyler and I are already acquainted, he acknowledged. He tried to set down without anyone's noticing the small barrel he carried under one arm, but Kit's glance was quick. A keg of fine Barbados molasses. So it was not just coral trinkets and flower bulbs that the seafaring friend of Hannah's brought from afar. Hannah caught the action too. Bless thee, Nate, she said quietly. Now sit down and tell us where thee has been this time. Charlestown, he said, settling on an upturned barrel. Instantly the cat slid from Kit's lap and with a loud "rawr" leaped into Nate's and circled contently. Nate winced as her claws dug rapturously into his coarse homespun trousers. Hannah made fast the thread and sat with idle hands, her eyes never leaving the young sailor's face. And thy father? He is well and sends you his greetings. I've been listening for a breeze every morning, just thinking thee might be coming up the river. I said to Thomas just yesterday, Tom, I said, I am going to save the last of these berries just in case the dolphin comes soon. He'll be pleased when I tell him you've been here. Kit's breath caught suddenly in her throat. Hannah had spoken as though her husband, so many years dead, were still here in the little house. A cloud had passed across the old woman's eyes, a vagueness that Kit had noticed there before. Kit turned a troubled look to Nate. He seemed not to have noticed anything amiss, but very casually he reached out his hand and covered Hannah's worn fingers with his own. Has the old she-goat had her kids yet? She asked easily. Don't tell me you've sold them before I could see them. The vagueness was gone as suddenly as it had come. I had to, Nate, Hannah said regretfully. They were getting into the cornfield. They brought a good price. 2 hanks of wool for a new cape. Nate leaned back now and surveyed Kit with frank interest. She had forgotten the intense blue of his eyes, like the sea itself. Tell me, he asked her, how did they ever let you find your way to Hannah? Kit hesitated, and Hannah chuckled. How did thee find a way here? She demanded of him. 'Tis a strange thing that the only friends I have found in the same way, lying had in the meadows, crying as though their hearts would break. The 2 young people stared at each other. You? Breathed Kit incredulously. Nate laughed. I'll have you know I was only 8 years old, he explained. Were you running away? I certainly was. We were on the way down river, and my father had just told me he was leaving me at Saybrook to spend the winter with my grandmother and to go to school. It seemed like the end of the world. I had never lived anywhere but with the dolphin, and it had never occurred to me that anyone but my father would teach me. I'd never in my life seen anything like the meadows. They went on, and all at once I was hungry and thoroughly lost and scared. Hannah found me and brought me here and washed the scratches on my legs. She even gave me a kitten to take back with me. A little gray tiger, Hannah remembered. The cat was our lucky piece for 6 years. Now Kit was entranced. I can just see you, she laughed. Did Hannah give you a blueberry cake, too? Right here at the table, nodded Hannah. I'd forgotten how a little boy could eat. Nate reached again to cover her hand with his own. Hannah's magic cure for every ill, he teased. Blueberry cake and a kitten. Did you go back to school? Questioned Kit. Yes. Hannah walked me back to the ship, and somehow I felt as bold as a lion, and didn't even mind the thrashing that was waiting for me. I know, said Kit, remembering the walk up to Mr. Kimberly's door. And now thee can both have supper with me again, said Hannah, delighted as a child at the prospect of a party. But Kit jumped to her feet with a guilty glance at the sun. Oh dear, she exclaimed, I didn't realize it was time for supper. Hannah smiled up at her. God go with thee, child, she said softly. She did not need to say more. They both knew that Kit would come back. Nate followed her to the door. You didn't say what you were running away from, he reminded her. Had it gone so badly here in Wethersfield? She might have told him, but looking up, she caught a hint of, I told you so, in those blue eyes that silenced her. Was Nate laughing at her for behaving like an 8-year-old? Her head went up. Certainly not, she said with dignity. My aunt and uncle have been very kind. And you've managed to stay out of the water? That superior tone of his. As a matter of fact, she told him haughtily, I am a teacher in the dame school. Nate swept her a bow. Fancy that, he said, a school mistress. Instantly, she wished she had not said it. But as Nate followed her into the road, his mocking tone changed. Whatever it was, he said seriously, I'm glad you ran to Hannah. She needs you. Keep an eye on her, won't you? What a contradictory person he was. She thought hurrying along the south road, always putting her at a disadvantage somehow, and yet now and then surprising her, letting her peek through a door that seemed always to slam shut again before she could actually see inside. She would never know what to expect next from him. Chapter 11. Midsummer heat lay heavily upon the Connecticut Valley. The bare feet of children were covered with fine, dry dust from the road. Inside the kitchen, small bodies squirmed on the hard benches, and eyes strayed from the primers to gaze through the door at the forbidden sunshine. Kit felt as restless as her pupils. If only I could be like Mercy, Kit thought. When her own voice rose in exasperation, she was ashamed, remembering Mercy's unfailing patience. Watching Mercy this morning, she thought again, soberly, of the words that Mercy had spoken earlier in the summer. There had been a rare afternoon when Judith had invited Kit to go with some other girls of the town to pick flowers and a picnic along the shore of the river. At the last moment, Kit had turned back to Mercy and cried impulsively, "Oh, if only you could go too, Mercy." "How can you bear it always staying behind?" And Mercy had answered serenely, "Oh, I settled that a long time ago. I remember it very well. Father had carried me to the doorstep, and I sat there watching the children playing a game in the road. I thought of all the things I would never be able to do, and then I thought about the things that I could do. Since then, I've never much thought about it." Teaching the children was certainly something that Mercy could do with love and skill. And yet, Kit often wondered what was it worth? All this work to master their letters? She herself had been eager to learn, scarcely able to wait to open the wonderful volumes in grandfather's library. But most of these children would never even imagine the adventure that words could mean. Here in New England, books contained only a dreary collection of sermons, or at most some pious religious poetry. Sighing, Kit glanced over the docilely bent heads of her charges toward the open doorway, and as she did so, a sudden motion caught her attention. She moved quickly. "I'm sure someone is out there again," she thought. "Today I'm going to find out." Yes, for the third time, a little bunch of flowers, buttercups and wild geraniums, lay on the doorstep. As she bent to pick them up, she was certain that a shadowy figure slipped behind a tree. Curiosity made her forget her pupils, and stepping into the road, she saw a small figure plainly and recognized Prudence Cruff. "Prudence," she called, "don't run away. Is it you who left the flowers?" The child came slowly from behind the tree. She was thinner than ever, clad in a shapeless sack like a fair tied about her middle. Her eyes, much too big for her pinched little face, gazed at Kit with longing. She reminded Kit of a young fawn that had wandered near the house one morning. It had drawn nearer just like this, quivering with eagerness at the food Mercy set out, yet tense to spring at the slightest warning. "Who are the flowers for, Prudence?" "You." The child's voice was nothing but a hoarse whisper. "Thank you. They're lovely. But why don't you come into the school with the others?" "I'm too big," stammered Prudence. "You mean you know how to read already?" "Nah, Pa wanted me to go to school, but Ma says I'm too stupid." "You don't really believe that, do you, Prudence?" A bare toe dug into the dirt of the roadway. "I don't know. I can hear you when the door is open. I bet I could learn as good as them." "Of course you could, and you ought to. Why don't you come in with me right now and see how easy it is?" Prudence shook her head violently. "Somebody'll tell on me." "What if they did?" "Ma would cane me. I'm not supposed to speak to you." Remembering Goodwife Cruff's hard, thin mouth, Kit did not urge. "Prudence," she suggested instead, "you could learn to read by yourself if you really wanted to." "I haven't any horn." Kit remembered something. "Is there a place where you can meet me where no one would tell on you?" she asked. "Can you get to the meadows?" Prudence nodded. "Nobody cares where I go, just so's I get the work done," she said. Then if you try to meet me there this afternoon, I'll bring you a horn book and I'll teach you to read some of it. Will you come? If I get finished, Prudence breathed. You know the path that leads from the south road over the Blackbird Pond? Prudence gulped. The witch lives down there. Don't be silly. She's a gentle old woman who wouldn't harm a field mouse. Anyway, you don't need to go that far. There's a big willow tree just down the path. I'll wait for you there. Will you try? The struggle behind those round eyes hurt to watch. Maybe, whispered Prudence, and then she turned and ran. Kit walked slowly back to the schoolroom. What excuse could she make to get into her trunks today? At the bottom of one of them, she had remembered, was a little horn book. It had been a present brought from England by friends of her grandfather's. It was backed with silver filigree, underlaid with red satin, and it had a small silver handle. She had never really used it. She remembered how she had astonished the visitors by reading every single letter straight off, but she had cherished the gift for its delicate craftsmanship. What a pity every child couldn't learn to read under a willow tree, Kit thought a week later. She and Prudence sat on a cool grassy carpet. A pale green curtain of branches just brushed the grasses and threw a filigree of shadows as delicate as the wrought silver on the child's face. This was the third lesson. At first, Prudence had been speechless. In all of her short life, the child had seldom seen, and certainly never held in her hands, anything so lovely as the exquisite little silver horn book. For long moments she had been too dazed to realize that the tiny alphabet fastened to it was made up of the same A's and B's and AB's that she had overheard through the school doorway. But now, by this third meeting, she was drinking in the precious letters too so speedily that Kit knew she must soon find a primer as well. "'Tis getting late, Prudence. I don't want you to get in trouble, and I must go back too." The child sighed and held out the horn book obediently. "This is yours, Prudence. I mean, it is a present for you." "She'd never let me have it," the little girl said regretfully. "You'll have to keep it for me." Kit made a decision. She had been wanting an excuse to take Prudence to Hannah. She had a feeling that the child needed that comforting refuge even more than she did herself. "I know what we'll do," she suggested. "We'll leave the book here with Hannah. Then any time you want to use it, you can come and get it from her." Terror blanched the child's face. "Prudence, listen to me. You're afraid of Hannah because you don't know her, and because you've heard such things that aren't true." "She'll cut off my nose if I go near her." Kit laughed, then took the child's hand in her own and spoke as earnestly as she knew how. "You trust me, don't you?" The small head nodded solemnly. "Then come with me and see for yourself. I promise you, on my honor, nothing will hurt you." The bony hand in hers was trembling as they walked down the grassy path, but Prudence stepped resolutely beside her. Kit's heart ached suddenly with pity and gratitude at such trust. "I've brought another rebel to visit you," she announced as Hannah came to the door. Hannah's pale eyes twinkled. "What a wonderful day!" she exclaimed. "4 new kittens, and now visitors. Come and see." Under a corner of the cabin on a pile of soft grass, the great yellow cat curled protectively around 4 tiny balls of fur. Her topaz eyes glowed up at them, and her purr was boastful. Completely disarmed, Prudence went down on her knees. "Oh, the dear little thing," she whispered, reaching one reverent finger. 2 black ones, and 1 striped and 1 yellow one. Over her head, Kit and Hannah smiled. "If thee is very, very careful, thee can pick one up and hold it," Hannah told her. With a black kitten cradled in her hands, Prudence watched them and a safe corner for the horn book. "Thee is welcome any time, child. I'll keep it safe for thee. Now show me what thee has learned today. What letter is this?" In the clean white sand on the floor, Hannah traced a careful B. Looking at Prudence, Kit held her breath. But there was no trace of fear in those fawn-like eyes as Hannah held out the stick. Boldly, Prudence reached to take it on her own hand, and carefully and proudly traced the lines herself. I believe there must be a morsel of blueberry cake for such a smart pupil, praised Hannah. The morsel of cake vanished in a twinkling. Hannah's magic cure for every ill, Nate had said. Blueberry cake and a kitten. Kit smiled to see it working its charm on Prudence. But there was an invisible ingredient that made the cure unfailing. The Bible names for it was love. Why do they say she's a witch? Prudence demanded as the two walked slowly back along the path. Because they have never tried to get to know her. People are afraid of the things they don't understand. You won't be afraid of her now, will you? You will go see her when you can, even if I'm not there? The child considered. Yes, she said finally. I'm going back the first chance I get, not just because the horn is there. I think Hannah is lonesome. Of course, she has the cat to talk to, but don't you think sometimes she must want somebody to answer back? Watching Prudence scurry off toward home, Kit had a moment's misgiving. As always, she had acted on impulse, never stopping to weigh the consequences. Now, too late, she began to wonder. Had it been fair to draw Prudence into her secret world? She felt completely justified in deceiving her aunt and uncle. They were narrow-minded and mistaken. But the thought of Goodwife Cruff made her shudder. Yet, Prudence had looked so miserable. She needed a friend. For a few hours, those weary, anxious eyes had been filled with shining trust and happiness. Wasn't that worth a little risk? Kit shook on her qualms and set her own face towards home and another dull evening. William could talk of nothing but his house these days. Every evening he must report exactly which trees had been cut, which boards fashioned. Today, he reported, as the family moved inside to escape the twilight mists that rose from the river, he had overseen the carpenter who was splitting the white oak for the cupboards. I don't think I made any mistake in deciding on riven oak, he told them. Of course, 2 shillings a day is high for a carpenter, but sometimes Kit wanted to stop her ears. Would she have to hear the price of every nail that went into those boards, and every single nail the finest money could buy? She was tired of the house already before the first board was in place. Judith, however, took a lively interest in such details. She had a flair for line and form and a definite mind of her own. And it was plain, to Kit at least, that as William planned his house, Judith was comparing it, timber for timber, with the house she dreamed for herself. Her purpose was only too apparent as she made adroit attempts to draw John Holbrook into the discussion. I think you should have one of those new roofs, William, she said now. Gambrel, they call them, like the new house on the road to Hartford. I think they look so distinguished, don't you, John? Mercy laughed at John's bewilderment. I don't believe John even notices there's a roof over his head, she leased gently, unless the rain happens to leak through into his nose. And then he just pick up his boots and move somewhere else, said Kit. William did not smile. He was considering the matter gravely. Perhaps you're right, Judith. When I ride down Hartford way tomorrow, I'll take a good look at that house. Of course, you never know whether to risk a new style like that. Oh, for heaven's sake. Kit gave her yam an impatient jerk that sent the ball bouncing across the floor. Too tardily, William bent to catch it and had to get heavily down on his knees to retrieve it from under the settle. Now, some men, Kit reflected, could pick up a ball of yarn without looking ridiculous. She thanked him with little grace. It was Mercy, as usual, who quietly steered them into untroubled water. What did you bring to read to us tonight, John? She inquired. Judith, light a pine knot for him to see by. In this one thing they were all united. John loved to read out loud, and they were equally happy to listen. For all of them, the days were filled with hard labor, with little enough to satisfy the hunger of their minds and spirits. The books that John shared with them had opened a window on a larger world. Perhaps each of them, listening, glimpsed through that window a private world unknown to the others. Matthew Wood sat scowling, his keen mind challenging and weighing each new thought. Rachel, Kit suspected, welcomed the peace and relaxation of those moments as much of the reading itself. What William thought, it was impossible to discern. Kit often wished that John would read something else besides religious tracts he so admired, but even for her impatient spirits, the beauty of his voice wove a magic spell. Tonight it was poetry. These were written by a woman in Boston, he explained. Anne Bradstreet, wife of the governor of Massachusetts. Dr. Bulkley feels that they are worthy to be compared with the finest poetry of England. This is what she writes about the sun. Art thou so full of glory that no eye hath strength thy shining rays once to behold? And is thy splendid throne erect so high as to approach it can no earthly mold? How full of glory then must thy Creator be, who gave this bright light luster unto thee? Admired, adored forever, be that majesty. Kit's needles moved more slowly. Her jangling nerves relaxed, and as the clear, low voice went on, a contentment wrapped around her like the sunshine in the meadow. John is a part of the family already, she reflected. We have all come to love him. Yet I still feel in awe of him a little. Uncle Matthew thinks he is weak, but I suspect that underneath they are both made of the same New England rock. For John, everything in his life, even the girl he marries, will always be second to his work. Does Judith realize that, I wonder? Or does she think she can change him? Suddenly, perhaps because the poetry had opened her heart, Kit raised her eyes and made a discovery. Mercy sat, as usual, slightly in the shadow beneath the hearth, her needles moving so automatically that she rarely glanced at her work. Now a brightly glowing bead of resin threw a brief flight across her face. Those great listening eyes were fastened on the face of the young man bent over his book, and for one instant Mercy's whole heart was revealed. Mercy was in love with John Holbrook. Faster than the thought, faster than thought, the shadows clarified Mercy again. Kit glanced hastily around the circle. No one else had noticed. Judith sat dreaming, a little secret smile on her lips. Rachel nodded drowsily, too tired to keep her mind on the reading. Matthew sat intent, ready to pounce on any hint of heresy. I must have imagined it, Kit thought, yet her hands were shaking. Mercy and John Holbrook. How right! How incredibly, utterly right, and how impossible! I wish I had not seen it, she thought in a burst of sadness. Yet she knew she would never forget as long as she lived. The flame that had burned in Mercy's eyes had such purity, such complete selflessness, that everything Kit had ever known seemed dim in its light. What must it be to care for someone like that?